I want to tell you about someone who once felt like a constant in my life. The kind of person you assume will always be there. Not because they were loud about it, but because their presence felt solid, reliable, warm. We met during a time when everything felt possible, when dreams were spoken out loud, and when staying up late talking about the future didn't feel risky. It felt hopeful. At first, nothing seemed unusual. They were magnetic, full of energy, ideas pouring out faster than they could finish sentences. They lit up rooms without trying. People were drawn to them. I thought, this is just who they are, passionate, driven, alive. But over time, I noticed patterns. There were days when their energy felt almost electric, like they were running on something the rest of us couldn't access. They talk about plans with absolute certainty, big plans, career changes, creative projects, life altering decisions all at once. Sleep became optional. Rest felt unnecessary. They'd laugh it off when I'd ask if they were okay. I've never felt better, they'd say, and I wanted to believe them. Then there were other days. Days when getting out of bed felt heavy, when texts went unanswered, when their voice, once bright, sounded distant, as if every word had to travel a long way just to reach me. They didn't want to go out. They didn't want to talk. They didn't want to be seen. And when I asked what was wrong, they'd say, "I'm just tired." I didn't realize how much effort it took for them just to exist. I started walking on eggshells without knowing why, carefully choosing words, carefully choosing timing, trying not to trigger something I couldn't see. Sometimes they pulled me close, needing reassurance, connection, grounding. Not explanation, not warning, not just distance. The hardest part wasn't the silence. It was the unpredictability. I never knew which version of them I'd get. The one who wanted to conquer the world or the one who couldn't face it. And I hated myself for thinking that way. But they were still the same person, still my friend. But loving someone like this teaches you something uncomfortable. Care doesn't always look gentle, and support doesn't always feel appreciated. There were moments when I felt helpless. Moments when I questioned myself. Was I saying the wrong thing? Doing too much? Not doing enough? I remember one night vividly. They were talking fast. Faster than usual. Ideas overlapping. Emotions swinging from excitement to frustration in seconds. I listened. I nodded. I tried to keep up. But then suddenly they stopped. Looked at me. And said, "You don't get it." That sentence stayed with me longer than anything else. Because they were right. I didn't get it. Not fully. I could see the behavior. I could feel the impact. But I couldn't feel what they felt inside. And it's when I learned something important. Not all struggles are visible. Not all battles are announced. Not all battles announce themselves. Not all struggles are visible. Not all battles announce themselves. Some people fight wars quietly, behind smiles, productivity, creativity, charm. Over time, things began to shift. They started disappearing for longer stretches. Friends noticed, work became unstable, relationships strained, and I realized how isolating it is to be misunderstood, especially when the world only sees fragments of you. Society celebrates intensely. Society celebrates intensity. We praise productivity, we reward people for pushing limits, but we rarely ask what it cost them. Eventually, they reached a point where they couldn't carry it alone anymore. Not because they were weak, but because no one should have to be strong all the time. They began asking for help, quietly, awkwardly, unsure if they were even allowed to. And I watched them learn how to slow down, how to question impulses, how to rest without guilt. It wasn't a straight path. There were setbacks, frustration, moments of resistance, but there was also something new, awareness. They started recognizing patterns before being overtaken by them, started building routines, boundaries, support systems. And I learned something too. I learned that being there doesn't mean fixing someone. It means staying when things are messy, listening without trying to solve, caring without controlling. I learned that love can't exist alongside limits. I learned to say, I'm here, instead of, let me handle this for you. Today, they're still navigating life, still learning, still human. They aren't defined by their highest highs or their lowest lows. They're defined by their resilience, by their honesty, by the courage it takes to keep showing up in a world that doesn't always seem to understand them. If you're watching this and you recognize yourself in this story, whether you're the friend or the one who loves them, I want you to know something. You are not broken. You're not too much. And you don't have to walk this alone. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is ask for help. And sometimes the bravest thing anyone else can do is stay. This isn't a story about labels. This is a story about humanity. And it's one I will carry with me always. We were both painters. Same college program. Same long studio hours. Same smell of dried acrylic that never really leaves your clothes. Art was the language we spoke when words failed. Their work stood out immediately. While most of us painted still faces, landscapes, or self-portraits, their canvases felt unsettled. The colors were intense, heavy, sometimes almost aggressive. Figures stretched in ways that didn't make sense. Eyes too large, hands distorted, rooms that felt titled, as if the floor itself was unstable. People whispered about it. Some classmates laughed nervously. Others avoided their work entirely. It's creepy. I heard someone say once. Another said, I wouldn't hang that in my house. I never told them what people said, because when I looked at those paintings, I didn't see something meant to scare. I saw someone trying to release something. In critics, professors struggled. In critiques, professors struggled. They praised the technical skill, the control, the confidence, the risk. But then they asked questions. Where is this coming from? What are you trying to say? And my friend would smile, just slightly. I don't know, they'd say. It just comes out. I painted differently. My work was calmer, more structured, more safe. Color theory, composition, balance. I liked knowing where everything belonged. Sometimes I wondered if that's why we gravitated toward each other. They lived in intensity. I lived in order. And somewhere between us, we understood each other without trying. Late nights in the studio became a routine. Music playing softly, paint drying softly. Silence that felt uncomfortable instead of awkward. I'd watch them work. Some nights they painted obsessively. Canvas after canvas, barely stopping to eat, barely looking at the clock. Other nights, they stared at a blank canvas for hours. Brush unmoving, frustration shimmering just beneath the surface. Their mood would shift with the paint. One week everything was vibrant, bold strokes, explosive colors. The next, muted tones, figures collapsed inward, and space closing in. I remember one painting in particular. A figure sitting in a room with no doors. The walls covered inward. A figure sitting in a room with no doors. The walls curved inward. The ceiling pressed down. No escape. When the critique came, the room went quiet. Someone asked, "Is this about feeling trapped?" My friend shrugged. "It's just a feeling," they said. But I felt it too. I started noticing how closely their inner world and their art were connected. How emotion wasn't something they could turn off. It poured out of them whenever they wanted it to be. How emotion wasn't something they would turn off. It poured out of them whether they wanted it to or not. There were days when people avoided sitting near them in class. Days when their intensity made others uncomfortable. And I watched how that changed them. How they began pulling back. How the studio, the place that feels like freedom, started to feel like exposure. I painted beside them through all of it. Not because I knew how to help, but because I knew that it felt like, not because I knew how to help, but because I knew what it felt like to be seen. Sometimes they'd look at my work and say, I wish my mind worked like yours. And I'd look at theirs and think, I wish I understood mine the way you understand chaos. The art school teaches you how to critique work, but it doesn't teach you how to hold space for the artist. Over time, their paintings grew darker, not in subject, but in weight. As if each canvas carried more than the last. I didn't realize then that art was the only place they felt fully honest. The only place they could exist without explaining themselves. And maybe that's why it scared people. Because it wasn't decorative, it wasn't easy, it was real. As the semester went on, the paintings changed again. They weren't just unsettling anymore. They were heavy. The figures began repeating. Same posture, same stare, same tension. Over and over. As if the canvas was stuck in a loop. The colors grew harsher. Blacks swallowed everything else. Reds appeared where they didn't belong. People stopped joking about their work. They just stared. Professors started pulling them aside after critiques. Long conversations in quiet corners of the studio. Lowered voices. Concern dressed up as professionalism. They assured everyone they were fine. They always said that, but I could feel the shift before anyone else named it. They started arriving at the studio at strange hours. Sometimes they'd already be there when I showed up. Other times they'd still be painting when the building was closing. Days blurred together. Their speech sped up, then slowed down. Their confidence turned sharp, then vanished entirely. One night I found them standing in front of a finished painting, shaking. The canvas showed a figure cracked down the middle. Two expressions, neither at rest. I didn't recognize myself anymore, they said quietly. I didn't know what to say, because the truth was I still recognized them. But I could see how exhausting it was to live inside that intensity. Soon, the painting stopped selling at student shows. Critiques became tense. Feedback felt like rejection instead of guidance. In the studio, once our shared refuge, started to feel like a place of judgment. They began skipping classes, then entire weeks. When they did show up, they seemed hollowed out, like all the energy that once spilled onto canvas had nowhere left to go. Their brush hovered, their hands trembled, their ideas collapsed before they could start. I remember the painting that scared me the most. A room with mirrors on every wall, no reflections, just empty frames staring back. When I asked them what it meant, they said, I think I'd been disappearing for a while. That was the moment I realized something was wrong in the way I couldn't paint around. I started staying longer, checking in more often, asking questions I was afraid of the answers to, and sometimes they'd open up, admitting how loud their thoughts were, how sleep felt impossible one week and endless the next, how they felt trapped between urgency and exhaustion. Other times, they shut down completely, put away, went silent. There was a stretch where I didn't hear from them at all. No messages, no studio sightings, nothing. I kept painting, but my own work changed. The symmetry slipped, the calm disappeared, my colors grew dull. I realized something then. When someone you love is unraveling, you don't stay untouched. Eventually, I found out they'd taken a break from the program. Not officially, just stepped away. The studio felt empty without them, and for the first time, I understood how easily someone can fall through the cracks. Not because they aren't talented, not because they aren't loved, but because their struggle doesn't fit neatly into a syllabus. Months later, they reached out. Just one message. I'm trying to rebuild. We met somewhere quiet. No paint, no canvases. They looked different. Tired but steadier. They spoke slowly now, more carefully. They told me they learned to recognize the signs before they took over. That they were learning how to pause instead of pushing through everything. Not because it was easy, but because continuing the old way had nearly cost them themselves. They didn't paint for a while, and when they returned to it, their work changed again. Still honest, still emotional, but now there was space, breathing room. The figures were still imperfect, but they were grounded. The rooms had doors again. Light appeared where it hadn't before. They told me something I'll never forget. I thought my intensity was all I had, but it turns out learning how to rest didn't erase me. It saved me. Watching them rebuild taught me that healing doesn't mean becoming unrecognized. It means learning how to live without constantly burning yourself alive for expression. Today, they still paint, and I still paint. Not to fix things, not to explain everything, but to remind ourselves that feeling deeply doesn't have to mean falling apart. This story isn't about art school or talent or productivity. It's about how easily brilliance and suffering get intertwined, and how quietly someone can struggle while being praised for their passion. If you're watching this and you feel seen, whether you're an artist or the friend beside them, please know this. Intensity isn't the same as truth, and rest isn't failure. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to step away from the canvas long enough to remember who you are without the noise. And here's what I've learned. Standing on the other side of that chapter, not every storm announces itself. Not every struggle looks like collapse. Sometimes it looks like brilliance, productivity, and being fine on the outside. I learned that creativity doesn't need chaos to exist, that intensity isn't proof of purpose, and that slowing down can be an act of courage, not defeat. My friend didn't lose their edge. They didn't lose their voice. They didn't lose what made them extraordinary. They gained something else instead. Choice. The choice to step back before everything breaks. The choice to notice when the colors start to darken. The choice to care for themselves with the same dedication they once gave only to the canvas. And I gained something too. A deeper patience, a quieter kind of love, and understanding that being present matters more than having the right words. We don't talk about those years much anymore. Not because they're forgotten, but because they no longer define the present. Now, when I walk past a studio late at night and see a light still on, I don't just think about ambition. I think about balance. I think about how far someone can go once they learn they don't have to destroy themselves to get there. If the story feels familiar to you, whether you're carrying the weight or witnessing it in someone you love, please know this. There is room to breathe, there is time to recalibrate, and there is life beyond survival. Sometimes healing isn't dramatic, sometimes it's quiet, subtle, unremarkable to everyone else. But it's enough, and sometimes it's everything.